Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to see all the beautiful faces, a lot of talks here going on outside. My name is Tomek Borowka. I'm the product owner at the Esports Observer. Some of you might know us. We are the leading B2B outlet when it comes to news and insights all about esports, and we want to help to educate the market. Why we're here today is we're going to present the second annual esports survey. Sounds like a small thing. For us, it means a lot. So we created that survey together with our partner Foley and Lardner, esports law firm, and we are very, very happy. We couldn't be more happy to have found a partner like this who's really committing for the long run, creating questions with us, asking the right people, and then, of course, delivering the answers. So Foley and Lardner, they have expertise from 177 years in different various fields where they practice, this is traditional sports team and leagues, this is merger and acquisition finance, marketing sponsorship, media rights, tech and entertainment, and of course, many, many others. So why did we come up with the survey? Why did we actually create that? It's a very simple answer. We want to understand what are your challenges. What do you want to know? What are the questions which bother you? And what are your opportunities? Where do you see the opportunities in this market? That was the thinking behind. And I already thank everyone who did participate in the survey. And of course, I encourage you to participate in further surveys, but also talk to us here. Find us, talk to us. I want to know what are your challenges, where do you see the market, so we can help to create another report, foster the growth of esports, and provide transparency to the market. A few topics we touched upon this year. Obviously, investments, a very, very big topic in esports. We actually also touched upon the impact of esports into traditional sports and vice versa. We asked people about challenges which can harm the growth of esports. And also, we ask if there are too few players controlling too much of the esports market. Today's presentation will be held by Bobby Sharma, a former senior executive at the NBA and IMG, who's currently wearing 3 hats these days. He's a special advisor at Foley and Lardner, especially at the Sports and Entertainment Group. He's the co-founder at the Electronic Sports Group, a leading esports advisory firm, and he is partner at GACP Sports, a private equity firm focused on European soccer. Please welcome everyone, Bobby Sharma. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today at Esports Rising. I'm excited to talk to you today about this survey and the results. As Tomek introduced very appropriately, it seems like a small thing, but it's actually, we're thrilled with the results and the insights it provides into a very fascinating marketplace at a really opportune moment in time. If there's one takeaway from this year's survey, it's this, that the business of esports is growing up. As a culture, esports is approaching a generation, but as a business, it's quick and easy to forget how young it is. We're just a few years into the real, actual, substantive business maturing, and it's easy to forget how young it is, given how quickly everything has evolved. In a moment, I'm going to take you through the survey questions and the results, which provide really interesting insights, we think, into the marketplace. And with 2 years now of survey results, we're starting to develop a picture of the business stakeholders themselves. They're becoming increasingly sophisticated with their views and thinking with respect to both industry opportunities and challenges. On the opportunity side, while business models in esports, as we all know, are still uncertain for teams, leagues, players, even the media companies, brands, and infrastructure components, esports revenues and viewership continue to rise, and we're starting to see through the survey respondents' view that the market is still poised for continued growth. Investors are increasingly jumping in, revenue sources continue to evolve, and technology continues to rapidly advance. opportunities within the business. The business models are starting to take more shape. We're starting to see the biggest and most successful leagues and teams and players measuring by viewership and revenue, beginning to create more nuanced businesses, some of which are starting to look more like media companies or lifestyle brands rather than sports in the traditional sense. With an already massive audience of 500 million people and growing, consisting of the most coveted demographics, young, natively digital, higher socioeconomic groups, inherently global, and all that while in the backdrop of traditional sports, which audiences are shrinking, esports continues to capture more and more revenue per audience, per customer, and it's increasingly starting to focus on bigger picture opportunities like its incredible scalability. On the challenges side, survey respondents will see have indicated increasing recognition that the sponsorship and media valuations will take time to grow, that patience is in order, especially on the media side, no matter how much capital or corporate muscle is coming into the equation, as we've seen in the past year. And questions are being raised and issues are being addressed that weren't even on the table a year ago. Headwinds in some cases, to be sure, but also signs of an industry and stakeholders maturing in their understanding of the business realities. We'll see the broad category of intellectual property is dominant on people's minds, perhaps the chief concern amongst many industry insiders, and there are layers to that. Player rights and labor and employment issues are big matters that are front and center. A lot of high-profile cases have arisen, as we all know in the industry, whether it be Tfue or Blitzchung with respect to China, as was touched on earlier. Gambling and integrity are also matters that are now starting to become top of mind in esports as esports becomes an industry of value, something more concrete and something more important to protect in terms of its elements. So these are all issues that have been front and center in traditional sports for many years. And as we see the economic relevance of esports and the capital infusion continue to come in, it's becoming increasingly important. And we'll see that even in the eyes of many people in the community, in the survey respondents, that esports is now starting to pose a more direct threat even to traditional sports. But now on to the survey. Sorry. I probably should have tested this before, but is this the right thing? Can you guys maybe advance for me? Okay. Okay, great. Excellent. That's what I was doing. But okay, terrific. So the first question we have here, in some cases we'll have results from 2018 to compare where we had overlapping questions, but the greatest areas for growth. So there's a remarkable consistency, I think, on the whole. The way this is layered, this is probably the hardest slide to see. I apologize in terms of the font size because there's so much on it. But a lot of consistency between the two. I think, if anything, the most interesting takeaway here is the displacement of media rights to third by in-game transactions. I think that's potentially reflective of the industry recognizing that the media rights revenue, which is generally considered to be the greatest area of long-term growth, is going to take longer to happen in terms of monetization. When you see the likes of Microsoft, Google, Fox competing for attention within the culture against Twitch, the dominant live platform, and still not really making headwinds to the point of a mature media market to bid up those rights, increase those values. That's something that I think is starting to be recognized as something that's going to take time, and at the same time, advertising and sponsorships has been the focus, continues to be the current focus, increasingly so in terms of monetizing, which also is taking time. On the second slide, I don't think this is working. There we go. We've got the question is sources of investment likely to increase in the next year. We're going to spend more time on this probably than the other slides, but I think there's strong investment signs for esports that are indicated here. This was sort of an open-ended check all that apply, and there seems to be a high degree of confidence that there's going to be a lot of M&A activity. Actually, the next slide we'll spend a lot of time on. But as we can see here, streaming and broadcasting, events and tournaments, franchise teams, consolidation is occurring within the industry. I think these trends will continue, and that seems to be reflected in the survey results. And the next slide is the one we're going to spend more time on, which is which of the following you think are likely to increase their investments in esports over the next year. So I think there are strong investment signs. In 2018, for example, I love this data point. $4.5 billion came into the esports industry, at an industry that was measured under $1 billion at the time. That's a huge amount of capital considering that fact, though it was up from $490 million the year prior. What's even more interesting, though, is the composition of that $4.5 billion with an increasing number of later stage capital, private equity firms coming into play. In 2018, the last full calendar year, there were 11 such investments, and from 14 to 17, there were only 9. So I think we're starting to see that the capital composition that coming into esports is important, not just in terms of the amount, but the character of it. And it's an indication of a belief in the long-term view of that esports is here to stay and part of our culture, and a patient approach to the returns. In this year's survey, as we can see, nearly half the respondents anticipate increased investments from PE and VC firms. That's up from 39% in 2018. Again, I think an indication of the industry insiders believe the sector is mature enough to draw an array of investors, but particularly those expecting growth and stability. So with that said, 47% also said traditional sports teams and leagues would increase their investments in athletes and celebrities. That's actually down from 2018, as you can see, from 57%. And this could be viewed as one of two ways. One, that sort of baked in, like these players have already are invested within the business of esports. And alternatively, it could be viewed bearishly that people who have projected traditional sports interests, resources, models onto esports are starting to recognize that it doesn't all translate 100%, and perhaps there's a point of view that maybe some of that capital is, that character of capital is going to come out. As someone who's worked extensively in the industry over the last few years, through my work at Foley and Lardner, an electronic sports group, I can add anecdotally, one of the things that seems to have a great degree of appeal, if not the most appeal, to investors these days is infrastructure. And it's often perceived as less risky and more stable, and that picks, axes, and shovel approach seems to be almost a way to park capital as all these other business models play out. Excuse me, I'm going to go on to the next slide. So this slide is most promising. I don't think this is working. I think those guys are helping me. Thank you. Most promising regions for investment opportunities in the next 5 years. This is also a very fascinating one. The Esports Observer actually wrote a nice piece on this too. But as you can see, the top 3 are pretty much the top 3 in population. Perhaps a correlation there, but I think the interesting takeaway here is the focus on the developing markets of China, India, and Southeast Asia, and their potential. And again, I think that speaks to the point of view that, especially in the case of India, which is still very underdeveloped as an esports market, and I actually lived there for 2 years on the ground when I was at IMG, there is a massive opportunity there. I was actually quite surprised by the results, recognizing that. But I think it speaks to the respondents, the industry insider point of view that that is inherently, this is all inherently global, and that's a very big opportunity on the short-term horizon. On the next slide, thank you. Now we're going to switch sort of topically to the interaction between esports and traditional sports. So following on question 3, we see here, if we add up the first 2 circles there, that 88% believe there'll be an increase in investments. This question was only asked of people who responded affirmatively to the third question. So it seems, to the extent that there is a bullish case to be made from that question in terms of composition of capital from traditional sports organizations, you can make the case that, okay, the number came down a little bit from 2018, but look at the degree of confidence that people have that who did respond affirmatively, that it's going to come up at least to a moderate extent, if not a significant extent. Slide 6. Ways in which esports growth has impacted traditional sports industry. I mean, it's probably quite hard to see that. Everyone's got a copy of this, as has probably been obvious to you, in front of you. If you'd like a digital copy of this, I know you can go to Foley.com. I think it's on our splash page at this point to download the PDF. But I think what's interesting here is almost all the respondents feel that the growth of esports has affected traditional sports, with only 10% disagreeing with the statement. An increased emphasis, one of the things here that obviously elicited the most response was an increased emphasis on digital media and live stream viewing options. That's the top perceived impact. I think that's we've all seen that. I think in the way my own company, the NBA especially, but a lot of sports organizations are now presenting their broadcasts in terms of more data points, interactivity to the extent possible technologically. I think there's been a big impact in terms of mainstream culture with traditional sports and otherwise by esports in that sense, that people expect more of a broadcast, and to a large extent, I think traditional sports is delivering that. And interestingly, 57% pointed to increased competition for viewership, particularly among millennials, and 44% to increased competition for sponsors and advertisers. To me, that's a validation of esports coming of age, that it's viewed now, and I think the reality is, as a direct competitor and a meaningful competitor with traditional sports for that all-important market share of audience. This is valid considering that by some data points, about a third of that massive 500 million esports audience does not even watch traditional sports. And I think we've seen traditional sports respond through whether it's efforts like 2K or other esports efforts that from other major professional sports leagues to get involved in esports. I think a lot of that impetus behind that is to connect more with this community that is very rich in terms of culture. It's very I don't mean that financially, but it's very cohesive, and to the extent it's not participating in traditional sports, that's a big problem for the traditional sports leagues. Now we're going to go on to legal risks, which I'm not just saying this because I'm a lawyer and Foley is co-sponsoring this, but I think this is a really interesting segment here in terms of the results. So with the growth in esports and investment, the growth in esports investments has been sizable and impressive. We're starting to see that industry insiders feel that the risks are starting to grow along with that. They're considering whether a small group of game developers have too much control, which we'll get to, and as Tomek referenced, and they're maintaining a focus on compliance amid legal risks surrounding intellectual property rights, data protection, and player rights. So here on slide 7, we see when asked whether cheating and cheating and match fixing pose a significant threat to esports legitimacy and growth. Just over 2/3 of respondents agreed or felt strongly that was the case. This is very logical as esports becomes an industry of very significant value with more and more concrete and important elements within it to protect. These concerns are rising to the top. As someone who spent nearly a year at the NBA league office, I can tell you that protecting integrity of the game was perhaps the singular most important directive organizationally. And again, this is another sign of esports maturity as an industry. Slide 8. So the top factors in contributing to the prevalence of match fixing in esports, I think these are all pretty self-explanatory, but the concerns are interesting. And again, I think fraud detection was at the top, but vulnerability to technology hacks, susceptibility of players to bribes, lack of a central overarching governing body. These are all concerns for respondents to a significant extent. The first two are illustrative of the challenges that are unique to esports, and maybe the fourth one as well, given its digital playing field, inherently fragmented nature, being composed of many games in effect from various publishers. Next slide. A small number of game developers control an outsized amount of power in this business, and that's a reality that we all know. It's a reality that is top of mind of investors, and it's a reality that affects a lot of the operations within esports, and it's something truly unique to esports, perhaps the biggest thing. That control factor that game developers have and can exert and have exerted, given their outright ownership of the core intellectual property in the space, is a potential constraint I think we'll see both in the survey respondents and reality to potential constraint to growth. It's a primary concern of survey respondents, with only 5% perceiving this not to be a problem, which is pretty remarkable. Again, almost uniform buy-in to all the listed factors here with API access, control over which teams can participate in leagues and tournaments, impacts on startups, restriction of growth on new esports through exertion of influence on teams and players, and investment levels being affected by the control elements. These are all concerns and probably valid ones, very valid ones at that. But very interesting to see how strongly people have responded to these questions. Next slide, please. Thank you. Slide 10. So organizational focus on legal issues and threats, ensuring compliance. I think similar to 2018, we see that most respondents believe their organizations are keeping up to date. I think the big takeaway here is that about a third of respondents either don't have a point of view or disagree. Generally, I think we're just scratching the surface of these matters as the business matures, which could be compounded by a lot of the unique dynamics of esports. Next slide. So this is all very fascinating and interesting too, where 2018 versus 19, we see the results pretty similar, but you can see them listed there in terms of what the issues are. But IP and licensing being top and up from 51% at 61%, cybersecurity, malware, player contract protections, gambling, discrimination, diversity issues, cyberbullying. These are all important factors, I think, that and risks that are in front of the industry right now that they're beginning to deal with in a meaningful way. And in some cases, by no choice of their own, like we covered at the top, the Tfue case and the Blitzchung matter have surfaced a lot of these things. But within esports itself and the business itself, this is a constant issue over the past few years, but particularly over the last. I'm going to go real quick over the last couple of slides as we're out of time, but slide 12. Which of the IP issues here are, I mean, again, fascinating that such a strong survey response in terms of the IP issues. Next slide, 13. Advanced tech, data, analytics, AI, VR, how will this improve and advance the industry? I think there's a great potential, and that respondents are seeing a great potential for advanced technologies in esports. You can go through the particulars there. The very last slide, slide 14. To what extent do you think mobile and tablet version of esports? I think we see here that most respondents, 78% of them believe that mobile and tablet versions of esports will grow in popularity. Just 4% are under the impression this won't be an impact. This likely ties in with the view of both developing markets and the massive number of those devices there in terms of the scalability of the sport, and then also, of course, just in terms of mainstream culture, how perhaps the most ubiquitous invention in the history of mankind are smartphones in everyone's pockets, that probably everybody in this room certainly has games on them. I think that sort of opportunity to grow the wider esports business, the gaming industry, by the de facto mainstreaming of video game culture as a part of our everyday lives is also somewhere where we're going to see a lot of growth for esports and the gaming industry more widely. But that's it. That's sort of tour of the slides, high-level view. You can read the report itself, which I think is very well done, if I do say so, by Foley and the Esports Observer. Some fascinating data points in there, and a lot of this is obviously open to your interpretation. This is our point of view on the data we got back, and thrilled with this partnership. And I think as we continue to do this, we're going to have even more interesting insights into the wider esports industry.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We are running out of time, but I would like to introduce you back on stage. So I would like to at least give the opportunity to ask one question. Of course, we will be here. We will around. There was a lot of data. There was a lot of context. You can see all of the report. There is a digital download on the Esports Observer, esportsobserver.com. If there is a question in the room right now, if there is none, I got one for you.
Sure.
So I want to get your take on, there's like billions, 4.5 billion being invested and so forth. So we track the investments in esports, and there's like $58 million over the past 2 years being invested in esport teams. All the organization, Cloud9, FaZe, you name them. 50% of that money went to the top 10 orgs. What does that mean? Does that mean if I want to invest money, there is like no other way to just go for the big ones, or like
Well, I mean, I mentioned this at the top that some of these businesses, these teams I was speaking of, are turning into what look like media companies or lifestyle brands. And in fact, I saw Steve's jacket, the liquid jacket, which is pretty great. I want to talk to him about that. But at the end of the day, I think, yes, there is a barrier to entry for the franchise leagues as the publishers are coming out with increasingly higher price points to get in that require capital. I think a lot of the capital that you speak of has been raised internally. That's maybe not something that's widely known. And to the extent that those investors are doubling down on their investment, seeing the opportunities, the scalability, the more nuanced business models, I think that reflects that a lot too. But at the end of the day, yes, I think there is a barrier to entry to franchise leagues, but not necessarily into esports more widely. And I think the real opportunities are tapping into the culture. And I think to the extent you're a content developer or creating a lifestyle brand, there's segmentation within those lifestyle brands within esports itself. It's a big community. There are massive opportunities there. But yeah, I think the franchises that are the publishers' leagues, the franchise leagues, are creating a sort of closed ecosystem within esports because of that factor.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone. Find us, talk to us. We want to know what are your challenges ahead and how can we continue to provide better questions and better surveys and reports. Thank you.